Good morning. A few years ago, our family of 5, along with my sister-in-law, spent 3 days during July in Iceland. That's right, Iceland. Glaciers, geysers, lots of rock. We were flying to Holland, and the airline offered us a chance to stop off on this island near the Arctic Circle and to stay a few extra days. So I thought, why not? So we booked flights only to discover that a hotel in Iceland was just slightly cheaper than a year's tuition. We eventually did learn of a small cabin with 4 beds and permission to pitch a tent outside. So, since this whole adventure was my idea, I agreed to be one to camp out with one of my sons each night. Our first day in Iceland was terrific. We saw waterfalls and geysers, volcanic ravines, and by evening I was more than ready to settle into the tent and catch some sleep. I expected to be out in no time. After all, I hadn't slept much on the red-eye flight the night before, and I thought I could sleep on anything, even lava, which is what most of the soil in Iceland really is. But this was my first experience with the midnight sun. It was 1 a.m. before it got dark. And then, about 2:30, the first lights of dawn filled the yellow nylon of the tent. Yellow, I quickly realized, was a mistake. It turned the faint morning glow into an inferno. Returning to sleep was impossible. Forget the hard soil or the rain. Forget the shriek of strange birds or the cry of the wind. The scariest thing that night was the sun. Meanwhile, back in the well-heated cabin with its thick shades, my wife Arlene and the rest of the fam, as my daughter calls us, slept in, completely oblivious to whether or not the earth was turning on its axis. About 4 a.m, my tent mate, our 16-year-old son Daniel, and I got up and decided to face the day. We checked in on the cabin at 5, 5:30, 6, no life. So Daniel and I had breakfast twice. Finally, I decided to give him his first driving lesson. Since there was no one on the roads. Daniel is now the only person I know who learned to drive a car on a lava field near the Arctic Circle. We've all had sleepless nights like that. You count to 100, then 1,000. You name all the presidents, all the books in the Bible backwards. You bury yourself in your sleeping bag, but the cold breeze in the morning light seems to slip through every single razor-thin crack in the zipper of the bag. I now realize why one of the most psychologically frightening movies ever made in Scandinavia is called Insomnia. Light is often a metaphor for beauty, for wisdom, for truth, for insight. But there are times when we have too much light, when insomnia drives us crazy. On the one hand, I mean this quite literally. One out of every 5 of you suffers from sleep deprivation. That leads to irritability, exhaustion, risk of heart problems, and perhaps even the need to catch up on homework in chapel. You probably won't be surprised that researchers have shown that sleep-deprived students don't do as well in academic work as those who get a good night's rest. Even though, note this, those who sleep less think they will do better. We all know some of the causes for sleeplessness: poor time management, roommate who studies late or not at all, too many hours staring at the incandescent glow of a computer screen, completing homework, playing video games, doing Facebook. Recently, Gordon faculty members Brian Aday and Sybil Coleman conducted research that shows that 1 out of every 3 Christian college students spends 2 to 4 hours a day on Facebook. And that doesn't even count YouTube, email, text messages, Twitter, or other internet browsing. To be honest, it is hard to sort out the constant flood of light from my own computer screen from the metaphorical sense that we have too much light at times in our lives. In many ways, the internet and the satellite television that we have, along with the explosion of knowledge in a globalized society, makes it so that we can be engulfed by data, by images, by words. All that information and the technologies that carry it are only expanding exponentially. And much of this is wonderful. greater access to information, greater light on injustice, quicker connections with the people that we love. But on the other hand, I'm not sure we are always prepared physically and spiritually to find a balance between the constant radiation of information and the restorative darkness of rest and renewal. Quite frankly, some of our insomnia may come simply because we surrender to the diversion of information. I can be guilty of that. Sometimes doing research for my Provost film series, I'll get lured into the rabbit hole of a blog, see what people write in response to film reviews, sometimes perhaps in the middle of a sleepless night. Blogging can be an expression of certain democratic impulses, but it can also be an endless diet of intellectual fast food. We can neglect the richness of a well-crafted, prudent, well-researched piece of work for information that is simply accessible, convenient, and provocative. We really need to learn the discipline not to lose ourselves in what is convenient and neglect that which is substantial. As Christians, I think we're also susceptible to the ways that we can be drawn into an insomnia created by care and concern for others. Ironically, it was in the midst of reading one of these blogs on the movies that I encountered a long threaded discussion about a Coldplay song called Fix You. You may know some of the words. When you feel so tired that you can't sleep, lights will guide you home and ignite your bones, and I will try to fix you. The lyric about lights to guide us home struck so many bloggers as ironic melancholy. They tell stories about the pressures they have felt to fix friends or families that were struggling emotionally, about the heartache of falling in love with someone they thought, often naively, that they could fix, or just the overwhelming sense that our world is so full of brokenness that you need to do something to fix everything. I think it's a danger that we all face, an insomnia of care. Friends and family need our attention and immerse us with messages that call us for a response all the time. The deep sense that there's so many people in our world that need help. New Orleans, human trafficking, Darfur. We often have so much light now shed on the corners of the world, some of those corners so heartrending that we feel compelled to attend meetings, join organizations, and get ourselves overcommitted on every cause. These are important and vital causes, but sometimes I think we need to stop, listen, and learn whether we're losing some of our effectiveness in service to Christ by being overcommitted. How many friends do you know whose lives are simply overrun by their schedules because they're involved in too many causes or involved in too much time at their computers? To be honest, I am not the best one to give advice. I have too many nights when I don't sleep well, too many midnight emails, too much soul-searching about tough choices, hurting colleagues, unreturned messages, too much anxiety that I need to do more as a provost, as a Christian, to help address the suffering in our world. And I do wonder what Jesus would do if he had to come along in the time of Facebook. How would he have managed all the people who wanted to be his friend? But even though there was no internet in the first century, there was constant pressure on Jesus. People who pressed him, to touch his robes, to hear him speak. Yet the Gospels tell us that Jesus would go away on occasion, to be alone, to pray, to renew his spirit. And as you may recall, he was even asleep in the boat when it was tossed by the storm. I take heart in this, that the Savior of our world often sought out silence, sleep, and restorative darkness, that he promised not just labor, but comfort and rest. So I end my thoughts this morning not with a remedy, but with a prayer, a word of encouragement. And my prayer and hope is that we would learn to be careful about overindulging in that which is diverting, spontaneous, and convenient, and spare more of our time for that which is beautiful, well-crafted, and wise. That we would give one another the gifts of time and space, being careful about how we fill one another's lives with obligations and demands for attention. That we would find restoration, sleep, of course, but also early morning walks, times for prayer, reflection, silence, and solitude. And perhaps most of all, I pray that we will discover how to find a balance between compassion and care, between patience and purpose. that we will learn the difference between a hasty rushing into every cause that may actually scatter and diffuse our energies, and the need to prepare ourselves carefully for the times when God will give us the opportunity not just to be busy, but to make a difference. My son Daniel learned to drive that morning in Iceland, but later that afternoon he was sound asleep in the back of the van as we drove by one of the great glaciers in Iceland. In one of the best novels written in Iceland, called Light of the World, a poet and idealist who is worn out and lonely walks across that glacier toward his tragic end beneath the midnight sun. I am grateful that the one we call the light of the world offers us something else, the promise of restorative darkness, the rest and comfort of his care, and the renewal of his mercies every morning. Thank you.